Hello guys, and in the last video we were covering more about logging and why we need more logging. We used the functionality of warn, log, and the other one, what was it? Yeah, the error, to showcase the information through our terminal. But as a side effect in our logging yesterday, last video, we made it. We have made our functions more convoluted than before, whereby now the function in itself not only has to handle the logic itself, but as well handle any information or log in information that is occurring within the function. For example, I hope that I have an example here. Yeah, find one. So basically, when we are doing find one function, not only does it have to throw the error, as well we are storing the information and putting that information in the terminal. Well, that would be okay for in the short run, but in the long run we don't want to add all the information, error information, through while we have to register the controller logger for each classes. We may end up forgetting it, and then as well we have to add this logger for every try catch we have in our function. That would be, you could say, a lot of energy consuming, if we are just logging the message itself of the error. But what we will try to do today is, instead of doing that, we will try to remove the loggings from the functions and all the normal all the generic loggings out of the classes and put it in somewhere. And how do we do that? So that will be similar logic to what we have done before in our validators. So in our create post or any classes that we have, like DTO, what we have is, you could say, decorators that validate the functions before calling the functions, like the methods, before going to this function, for example, or this, where is it? Yeah, before this function, it will validate the class itself and run, and then later on, when there is an error, it will throw an error before even calling this function itself. So instead of validating before the class is before the function is called, in this logging, what we'll do is, instead of doing that before, we'll do that after, and we will use a concept called interceptor. And in the documentation, I think that will be really good to showcase in the documentation, because they have really good diagram. So what is an interceptor is, it, again, the name itself, it intercepts whatever happens in between the client side and the server side, so any request and response. But what we are doing, instead of caring about the request, because we are not validating anything similar to our validators, what we will care about is the response. So we will intercept with the response, and if we notice that there is an error, we log it in our terminal, or if there is any information. So how do we do that? Is, let's start with our so I have made a file or a class, login.interceptor.ts. so in here we don't have anything at the moment. So what we'll do is create a class, and this class we will call it a logging interceptor. So in order for us to catch any response or request similar to the diagram, what we have to do is we have to implement a interface made by the Nestjs, and it is called Nest Interceptor. So this Nest Interceptor is forcing us to have a function called Interceptor. So this intercept function, it has two parameters. So it is called context and next. I will talk about that a bit later. So in here, what we have to do, so when we are intercepting, what we have to do, we want to log whatever happens in our response. So first we will import our logger class, and this logger class, initially it will have the information of the logging interceptor class, so initializing as logging interceptor as the context. So whenever there is information, we will showcase that. But what we want later on is to have the services, or like when there is something happening in the post controller, to have the post controller class as the context, like this yellow part of it. So what we'll do is there's something in the context. So when you hover on the context, there is some functions that we have. So some of the functions is get class. So what execution context means is who is executing, which function or which class is executing. So for this case, for example, if it's a post controller, so it will happen in the post controller. So we have a function called get class, and that get class, for example, will be the user controller class or post controller class, and we'll get the name similar to our previous one for the loggings. Now next would be, what we will do is we will use something called next, and this next is you could say is the one that contains the request or response methods. So what we have is, so it's kind of weird, where what you have to do is, if you have noticed, our return is observable, and Nestjs under the, like in this interceptor, it's using RxJS. So RxJS is something called, I think you could say, reactive programming, and I haven't gone to that deeply yet in that concept, and I need to study that part as well. So, but just simply put, what you have to do is use next, and then in that function you have to use something called handle, and that handle makes it as observable. So what we will do in the RxJS, so in RxJS world, what we could do in an observable is use something called pipe, and pipe is something along the line as transforming data, and this data could be request or response. So what we'll have here is a pipe, and in the pipe we'll have a function. So we are transforming this data, and this data we don't want to transform, but we just want to log an information. So I'm giving lots of information at the moment, but bear with me in the here, right? So in the .pipe we'll have a function called tab, and tab is like, it doesn't transform any data in our request or response, but we care about only the information that is happening within the data. So for example, for this instance, we want to log the information that an event has occurred in that particular class, which would be, for example, again, post controller or users controller. So the tab, inside the tab, so what we have here, when you hover in the tab, you have 3 functions inside, so you could use 3 functions. It's weird, it's using function within a function within a function. I know it's kind of weird, but yeah, it is what it is now. So in the function, in the tab function, we'll have next, which is the one we need, and the second one, which will be error. So those two functions we'll be using. So the first one will be next, which is logging our information. So we will use this. So this first one will send an information, anything that is occurring. That's the first one. So an event has occurred. Doesn't matter what happens, we're just saying an event has occurred. You could use it for different purposes, like something has been created or anything like that. You could validate the data. So if you hover on tab, you could have data, you could see whatever you receive from the response. Now we continue. The second parameter, which will be second function, which will be error. So here we'll log the information that is occurring when there is any response happening with an error. So we'll say, so we'll use that. So this is the function. So this .log error, or something bad happened, and then here we'll give the information like all right, we'll give information of what the problem happened. So we'll use the $, tilde, and we'll use error dot message. So that will be it. So here again we have an interface that we have to implement to use the function, so to intercept the request or response. And what we have here is an intercept function which has to be implemented in order for us to use the Nest interceptor. So we are using the private logger. So initially it will be a logging interceptor, but later on when we are calling a controller or anything that is handling the client's request and response, it's within the first parameter called execution context. In the execution context we have a function called get class, and that get class will have whatever class that is being called first with the dot name as to make it as a string. So next, so in the return, so this function requires an observable. So in order for us to use the observable, we'll use next.handle, and in the dot handle is, since it's an observable, because it's in a reactive programming, we could use observable as we have to transform the data. So to transform the data, we'll use pipe, and in the pipe we'll use something called tab. That tab doesn't transform any data, but it just, what we could do is log information, and for this case it will be this .logger.log and this error and those stuff. Now that will be it, but similar to what we have done in our DTOs, we have to go to our main.ts and register as similar to what we have done here. Instead of global pipes, we'll use something called interceptor. So we will import our logging interceptor class, and we will use app.useGlobal interceptor, and we will initialize as our logging interceptor. That will be it. So now we have our interceptor that stores all information that is happening. So for example, whatever happens, it should give us an event has occurred, whatever endpoint we create. So let's go to our endpoint here. So let's say, for example, post 1. Oh, that will be an error. So post not found. So post controller you have seen, right? So this is an event has. So we could say, for example, users, and we'll just say 1, and an event has occurred, and you could see that an event has occurred with the user's controller, because we have done here and an error has occurred. But we didn't get the something bad happened, because we have to change some stuff in the poster service, actually poster controller. So in here, find one, what you have to change, let's just remove this. So we'll remove the try, we'll remove the catch, we'll remove this curly brace, and we'll remove our log here. We don't want to have our log anymore. We don't want to have our error message. So now we have it back again clean, and let's remove our line level 8. So the logger, let's remove that too, and now let's try to use it. So let's go back, let's just use posts. So we are not catching anymore, so we're not giving any information, so we're not catching. So what should happen in our interceptor, this should be called alone, and something bad has happened should be logged in our as information. So we'll go to our posts, and let's say, for example, 3, and we as you have noticed, something bad happened and post not found. So we received that information here, and we intercepted it as our log information. So that's a cleaner way of doing it, more complex, but more like easier, much more cleaner. We don't have to care about our users controller loggers, so we don't have to worry about this one and the other loggers that we have in across our system. So let's clean up here. We'll go to our user service. Let's remove that one here, and let me actually warn, for case of warn we may need it, but for an error, for example, an event has occurred, we don't need that anymore, so we'll remove that. And yeah, you could do more stuff in the interceptor, like transform the data, check what the data we received, and give that specific information here. And yeah, that will be it, and that's how we're going to conclude our logging chapter. And yeah, thank you very much. And if you want to have more information about the interceptor, so this is the documentation, like always check it out. And as well, the thing that I was talking about, which was RxJS, that is doing the observable thing, so you could check their documentation as well. So rxjs.dev, and I think I'll put that in the description down below. Alright, thank you and have a good day. Bye.